What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? My parents came to visit and my mother, who is very old-fashioned, the woman should be a homemaker and if not she shouldn't out-turn the man kind of old-fashioned, told my wife, who makes stacks as a dev team manager compared to my peanuts as a sports writer. You know dear, you really should try to keep a cleaner house. And without looking up from her making lunch, my wife said, yeah, your son forgot to clean this week before you guys flew in. The stunned look on my mom's face was priceless. When an unhappy client threatens to go hire a better lawyer, they don't seem to get that this isn't a threat when they aren't paying me. When I was working customer service for a restaurant delivery service not unlike DoorDash, I had a customer send in a complaint about hair in their food. The hair was sitting on top of the food. I checked their account, and they had one order on their account, which is a red flag. I check their phone number and find multiple accounts, each other 1-2 orders, all of them complaining about hair in the food. I deny a refund because the customer has actually used the same identical photo for the last order since they ordered the same thing. The customer tries to argue with me, threatened to never use the service again, typical stuff that they always say. Eventually the customer gives up and ends the call, then immediately tries again. I get the support request, see who it is, then deny the refund again. She ends the call, then tries again. The person behind me gets the call. I tap the person on the shoulder and show them what I pulled up on my screen, and that person denies the refund. The next day she calls back and tries again and is outside of the refund window, so the customer demands to speak to a supervisor. The supervisor bans her from the service for multiple fraudulent refund requests. I work in an NHS hospital. No one pays anything out of pocket for treatment here, it is all paid for through taxation. A patient was added onto our clinic who had paid one of our doctors for surgery privately at another hospital, but she was getting her follow-ups free on the NHS. Technically this should not happen, but it does. These patients can be a bit difficult. This lady's appointment was at 8:55 before we even started at 9:00. She had her workup done when we actually clocked in and was all snooty about waiting 5 whole minutes, bearing in mind she is saving a fortune. Then one of the nurses from the ward called and an actual NHS patient needed seen urgently, so they were brought up and seen ahead of the private patient. Well, this woman went mental, started shouting and bawling that she had paid all this money and she demanded service. Our charge nurse went out, demanded to know who had taken money off of her, really drilled the patient to point to the person who had dared take money off of an NHS patient. Well, the woman went beetroot, stuttered that she had paid the other hospital, and the charge was like, exactly, your money is no good here and doctor is being paid by the taxpayer to see this emergency patient first, so kindly sit down and be quiet or leave my department until you can be civil. I worked at a grocery store for 5 years, putting up with crazy customers and their awful attitudes. At the end of my tenure our store was set to be closed, and for the last month the store was sold to a liquidation company, meaning we were no longer under our parent company's umbrella and were no longer concerned with retaining customer loyalty. I got to tell customers no and respond with every bit of sarcasm and disdain to every Karen I encountered for 1 month until the store officially closed. I worked at a movie theater and some customers were adamant that a staff member had stolen their wallet after they dropped it. Turns out that these people just could not see and found the wallet once they actually looked for it. They got irate with literally everyone, from the mall security to the managers to the staff. Mall security finally said, get the duck out, and the customers went, you can't say that, this isn't your theater, we read customers. Mall security guy promptly said, this is my mall, and I can do whatever the duck I want. My dad is 6'3", I am 6'10". Sometime in my early teens, I shot past him. Dad was a yeller, not doing what he thought I should be, no discussion, just yell. But I realized at some point that he would not yell at me if he had to look up while he was doing it. I do not remember what our last argument was about. I just remember that I did sort of caught on at this point. So I am in my room in front of the computer. Dad comes in and starts yelling at me. I eventually stand up and start yelling back. Dad makes an excuse to leave. dad comes back about a half hour later and starts yelling again, but at this point, it is all I can do to not just laugh. I know that the instant I stand up, the argument will end. It actually wound up being really good for our relationship, because Dad realized that he actually had to make valid points, rather than just going into former drill sergeant mode. New CEO came to our department on the first day of his work. He did not have a pass card yet, and a lower-level employee told him that he cannot enter without pass card. CEO got upset and ordered a worker to let him in, but the worker insisted, "Show me the pass card, or you are not entering." Few days later this worker got a bonus. Girl came into my apartment to hang out with my roommate, demanded that I turn off the football game I was watching so we could focus on her. I literally said to her, "Who the heck do you think you are?" and kept watching the game. She yelled at me and stormed out. Thankfully me and my roommate never saw her again. Probably watching a few Texas DPS officers realize they could not shut down a whole airport. I was working as a flight instructor at small airport on a Saturday afternoon. We had one plane that had an issue on takeoff and veered off the runway. It cartwheeled and totaled the airplane, but fortunately the pilot was not seriously injured. I had a student who was next in line for takeoff when it happened. He called me from his phone as it happened. I hopped in the airport car with one of the rampers and drove out to the plane with a radio to inform inbound planes to use the other runway. We had no control tower. On the way to the runway I called the airport manager, who drove to the airport, and on his way he made a phone call to officially close that runway. About 30 minutes later a metric dozen of DPS officers showed up and immediately tried to close the whole airport, treating it like a giant crime scene. They were carelessly driving around the airport like they owned the place, ignoring the planes that were moving around, and crossing our only open runway without regard to inbound traffic. A mechanic and I tried to tell them to be careful and they got mad at us. One of them told me they were locking it down a couple times, meaning the whole airport. Now I was a broke-ass flight instructor and I had a flight that afternoon that was ultimately going to help pay for me to eat that week. The airport manager was a short, stereotypical country guy, also former Navy. He was not intimidated at all by the cops trying to close his airport. When he showed up I was about to go out with a student who was pre-flighting for a cross-country. There were about 5 cops in the lobby, me with my flight bag, the airport manager, and a mechanic. One of the cops saw my flight bag and said, "I do not know why you have that or why he is out of the plane. You are not going anywhere." The moment he finished his sentence the airport manager said, "It is one runway that is closed. The airport is still open." This pissed off the cops. I was about to head out the door, and one of the officers said he was driving out to the disabled plane. The pilot had been gone for about an hour. The mechanic said, "You need to be careful," and the cop quickly retorted, "And why the heck is that?" And he said, "Because this is still an airport, and the first thing that hits you is going to be a propeller." A few seconds later a plane took off as one of the cars was approaching the runway intersection, ironing in that point. I walked out, and as I was hopping in the plane with my student the same cop came up to me and said, "You are not going anywhere. We are locking this down." I looked at the airport manager who followed all of us out to the ramp. He said, "Have a nice flight, Ajax Poo." You could see these cops just fuming that they did not have the authority to close down an entire airport because one plane went off the runway. The airport had 2 runways. Where the disabled plane was located was probably a mile or so away from the open runway. Why they were making a big fuss, I do not know. The occupant was relatively uninjured. His wife was the worst thing he had to deal with that day. He told her he was not going to fly. We had a good flight, and I got to eat dinner that week. I was working as a consultant for a company. There was a bit of a competition between me and this guy. Company starts to have some financial issues, so I leave and start working for a client of theirs. Shortly after joining they bring in this guy I was competing with at my old job. He was technically my equal, except now I was employed by the client and he was just a consultant. He was trying to one-up me during meetings, and my boss told him that decisions are made by the company, not the consultants. It felt good. I personally had one that I am quite proud of. I was one of 2 mechanics responsible for an annual inspection on a Piperero fixed-wing prop aircraft. Aside from dismal compression ratios and some odds and ends in the aircraft that could be overlooked by technicality, there was a problem with the main landing gear motor. The down and lock cycle for that aircraft is required by the OEM, and by extension federal law, to be 30 seconds or less across one cycle of the motor. This plane's gear requires 3 to 5 cycles across about 2 minutes to achieve down lock. I told the owner, who was a famously sleazy lawyer, that he cannot fly his plane and I would not sign off the annual until the main landing gear are fixed. The lawyer told me to sign off the annual and he will get to fixing the gear some other time. When I said no, he proceeded to threaten my job and demanded to have the plane back so he could get another mechanic to sign it off as airworthy. I laughed in his face, impounded his aircraft and notified the fact. The man eventually gave his aircraft to my business I was working for at the time by way of title lien in order to pay off the massive hangar fees he racked up from his plane sitting in my shop. I was a salesman at a wire and cable place. I got a call Friday morning from a tow truck driver freaking out. He needed a replacement cable for his truck ASAP because the weekends were the big business days for him. Bragging about the big money and people who leave their cars somewhere overnight because they are too drunk to drive home. He was shitty and rude the whole time we were on the phone. He demanded that the cable be cut and shipped immediately. Sent next day air. Saturday delivery pretty expensive. I rushed his order, ran back to the warehouse to hand it to the manager myself to make sure it could jump in line and get cut before the next day air guy showed up. But we did it, rushed every part of it and got it shipped out in time. Every person involved prioritized this order to get it out to him on time. Tow truck dude calls me back later that afternoon saying he got the truck working and no longer needs the cable. He asks to cancel the order and get a refund. I explained to him that because he had it cut to a specific length, if we were to take it back, there would be a restock fee because we are not going to be able to resell it until someone needs the exact specific length. I also explained that I cannot refund the shipping costs because the order has already been shipped the way he demanded it be sent out. Dude loses his mind, screaming at me, telling me he is going to give the company terrible reviews everywhere and tell all his friends how we are all pieces of shit. There was literally nothing I could do for him. No amount of him being an asshole could uncut and unship that order. My job right before my current one, property manager, the owner was an absolute prick. He was heartless and rude and racist and I loathed him. I hated every day going into the job, but I needed the money. I was applying daily to my dream company in hopes that eventually I'd be accepted. In the meantime, every time I complained or mentioned something to my supervisor, I was told to shut up and get on with it. He was paying me too much to have opinions. 3 years after, we were a small office and the receptionist and assistant prop managers had quit. I finally got accepted into my dream company and happily put in my 2-week notice. In desperation, he offered me more money, a higher position, better benefits, which were laughable. When I said no, he asked why. I have never felt more gleeful than the moment of when I said I don't know. I am not paid to have opinions here. That was a year ago and even now the look on his stupid old face gives me joy to this day. Edit typo and obligatory. Didn't he expect this to blow up? But yeah, I am petty. What s new? LOL. Thanks for the awards. To those who mentioned this was a very brief summarized version, and yes, he did remember saying it to me. He told me I was being too sensitive and should take more money. I've kept in touch with my awesome supervisor, and in the year since I've left, the position has yet to be filled. Everyone keeps quitting because they can't work with someone like him. So, bahahaha. Edit 2 also, since a few people asked the new job a yearish in is doing great and still to this day almost cry at the thought that I have benefits that include health insurance and a boss that doesn't call me sweetie in a tone that indicates I can't chew gum and walk at the same time. Some White House lady sat at my bar and tried to get a drink without ID. She pulled out her White House ID card which had no DOB. I work at the White House. I told her that her bosses would be very proud of me enforcing their laws when I did not serve her a drink. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.